Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I've helped clients land over $500 million in NIH funding, and I am here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee or tea or your favorite hot beverage and let's get started. It's absolutely freezing cold here. I live in Western Massachusetts, so it's been hot beverages for about a week now. That's all we've been drinking. So in terms of what you should be viewing, it's January 8th. We're less than a month from the R01 deadline, a little over a month for the deadline for the short formats and the Ks, and of course about a month out for the resubmission. So hopefully you're done watching. Hopefully you're polishing and putting the finishing touches and final edits and that kind of thing, getting feedback from your collaborators and working on getting the last of your letters of support and things like that, and putting the package together and working with pre-award support and your team members to put the finishing touches. So those of you who are early birds who are looking to prepare for your June applications, then you should be looking at the Chapter 1 preparation of Master the R series if you're applying in the R series. In terms of what's going on at NIH, of course, this is going to be the first cycle that utilizes the new scoring criteria, where significance and innovation are merged, and investigators and environment are, while they remain criteria, review criteria, you will not receive a numeric score for them. And what else? It should be an interesting year at NIH, and we'll see what happens. So we do have questions in. Oh, we actually have a lot of questions. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to forge ahead. There are just two things I wanted to ask people before we forge ahead. One of them is we are putting together the schedule for the spring. So we're looking for topics for mini tutorials and suggestions for guests. We're booked through, I think, till the end of February at this time. But if you have suggestions for topics you'd like to see covered, feel free to, it's probably easiest to email me directly. So meg@bouviergrant.com, that's BOUVIER grant.com. And let me know what your suggestions are, either for mini tutorials you'd like to see me do, or topics or guest suggestions. And I would love to do a live edit of an Ames page or a portion of an Ames page. So if anybody is willing to let me do that, you can anonymize it. You can redact to your comfort level on the Ames page, even if it's just, the narrative overview, the disease burden section, or, maybe it's the we propose paragraph, or maybe it's the Ames themselves, or maybe it's just the impact statement. You could get free editing on a section of your Ames page. And it would be great for the audience to have some experience of live editing. So if anybody is interested in that, even if it's not the entire Ames page, and even if you want to redact some identifying information, please email me, meg@bouviergrant.com. And I think there's, the email is now in the chat for those who are interested. So those are two possibilities. And actually, while I was preparing for this session, I came up with a topic that might be of interest concerning R34s. I'm going to start with the mail-in question about R34s, but one of the questions that I had is, would people like to see a topic where I talk about the types of NIH mechanisms that people use to plan for a full-scale trial at the R01 level? So this would be looking at the pros and cons of opting for an R34 as a clinical trial planning grant, the R21 when it's used in the clinical trial required form, and the R61, R33, which is a longer mechanism that sometimes people use for that purpose. So if people would be interested in that, let me know that too. You can email me that as well. So meg@bouviergrant.com. Okay, without further ado, because we now have 8 questions to answer. I was wondering if you could talk about what the specific aims for an R34 clinical trial planning grant should look like. Should they be similar to the aims of your eventual clinical trial, or should your aims be more developmental? So thank you for this question, Brittany. This is a really good question. So the R34 is typically used as a clinical trial planning grant. There is no more parent R34. In years past there used to be, but now institutes sponsor their own. And typically it's a 3-year award, and the typical cap on the directs is 450,000. But I've seen it go up higher. I've seen it go up. I think NCI has sponsored one that was like 650 in directs on the cap, but 450 is pretty typical for a 3-year clinical trial planning grant at R34 mechanism. So in terms of how to structure, well, let me say that the goal of the R34, when it's used as a clinical trial planning grant, is to help you gather all the information you need to inform the design of the full-scale trial at the R01 level. So your aims should be structured accordingly. And as such, they are not typically the same as the question was, do I structure them more developmentally, or do they look like the aims of the eventual trial? You should structure them more developmentally typically, because the full scale trial is going to, it's going to look at the effect of some kind of intervention. But in the R34, you may look at that in a preliminary sort of way, but really you're trying to figure out things like, will our strategies for recruitment and retention work? That's the kind of thing you're looking at. Is it feasible? Is the intervention feasible? Does this cohort find it acceptable? You're looking at like these kinds of simpler questions, and the answers and your aims should be structured accordingly. So like if you're looking at if you're examining different strategies for recruitment and retention, the aim might be something like determine the optimal strategy for recruitment and retention to be used in the full scale trial. And then the deliverable would be, at the end of this aim, we will have the information we need to inform our strategy for recruitment and retention at the R01 level, because obviously an R34 is going to lead to an R01. So not only would I make them more developmental, I would also include a deliverable at the end of each of those aims, so that the reviewers are crystal clear how the aims are going to inform the design of the full-scale trial at the R01 level. So hopefully that answered your question, Brittany, but if not, please put more clarifying information in the Q&A. Okay, so let's switch gears and go to the Q&A. So we have a question here. It's a 2-part question. So Jamie, don't clear it until I answer both parts. The first part is, would having 2 aims work for the K99 R00 application, one for the K99 and one for the R00, or is it necessary to include at least 3 aims, 2 for the K99 and 1 for the R00? I've never seen a hard and fast rule concerning this, but I have never once in my career laid eyes on a K99 R00 that had 2 aims. So I can't say that it's not allowed, nor can I say that it would be unsuccessful. What I can say is that every single K99 R00 I have ever seen in my 18 years of doing this work had 2 aims for the K99 and 1 for the R00. And then the aims page is written so that it's like K99 aims, aim 1, aim 2, R00, aim 3. So for whatever that's worth, I don't want to tell you it's an absolute hard and fast rule, but I've never seen that done. So you may want to just stick with what people typically do. The second part, should all letters in support focus solely on the K99 stage, or can they also reference the R00 stage? Since the R00 is an independent phase, is it appropriate to indicate continued support from my primary PI for the R00 aims? If my primary PI cannot be involved, does this mean no support from anyone at all, and that the R00 must be entirely independent, even just for consultation? This is a great question, and I get some version of this question a lot. So typically for the R00 phase, there's some kind of weaning process going on there. It's not as if like the K99 ends and they push you out of the nest and you're just completely on your own. But you do want to be super careful. Like you're showing an appropriate amount of sensitivity about what you say in terms of your support at the R00 level. So I think it's okay to say that the PI is going to be there in a consulting capacity, but you don't want to say that they are mentoring you. You never want to use a word like that for the R00 phase. So really kind of downplay the amount of support they're going to give you at the R00 level. Like they'll be there if you have questions, but this is the R00 is you. You are functioning as an independent person. And as such, you don't want to talk about like weekly meetings and working with them, side by side on anything. So I'm guessing that your mentor probably has experience with the K99 R00, and you could probably discuss where that line is in terms of what it's okay to say. Um, and or you could talk to the program officer about it. But I do think it's okay to say that there'll be a little bit of like they'll be there if you need consulting, but it's not going to be they're not mentoring you. You're not going to meet with them regularly at that point. That's typically how that is worded. It's also something that the way reviewers respond to it can vary by study section and by institute. So I would check in with your mentors and program officer about that. But I think that's typically how it's done. Okay, I have an investigator with limited preliminary data who is therefore pursuing an R21. Are there other NIH mechanisms that claim not to require a lot of preliminary data? So obviously the key question is the applicant an ESI? Because, there are certainly mechanisms that don't require a lot of preliminary data at the ESI level. So among those would be, first and foremost would be the CATS. ESI R01, which is you're not only are you not required to have preliminary data, you can't report any. You have to have zero or you can't report that you have any preliminary data. Many applicants have it and don't report it. So but you'll be disqualified if you report preliminary data on a CATS. So because it's just not allowed. So that's a possibility. It's for ESIs that are moving in a new direction. You could also check the DP2 or DP5, which are in the high risk, high reward mechanism. I'm assuming well, I shouldn't assume that, but if that would also be for earlier stage people. So I would say just generally look in the high risk, high reward mechanism. So I can't remember how much is required on the transformative R01, but certainly the DP2 and the DP5 do not require a lot of preliminary data. The other thing is the R03, but there are fewer R03 mechanisms, and it's a lower budget than the R21, and I don't know that the funding lines are better, but there might be something appropriate in the R03 area that might be useful as well. And of course the R34, which we just discussed, but that's for clinical trials. So I don't know if this person is proposing a trial or if they're ESI, but those are just some of the mechanisms that require less data. What to do with the just-in-time request if IRB approval is not available yet and a clinical trial grant scored in a potentially fundable range? Thanks. I'm not sure how you report it in the just-in-time because I'm never involved in that, but you don't have to have your IRB approval when your application is scored. I think there's like and I'm blanking on how many days it is. I want to say like maybe like 60 days after you get funded or something like that. You have to have that. I would double check what that is, but ask your pre-award support office about that because I never get involved with the post scoring piece of it. So ask your pre-award support office how to handle that in the just-in-time request. But there is a rule around that, and I'm just blanking on what it is because I never deal with that paperwork. But you probably could just say in the just-in-time request that it would be pending funding and we would have it within the required time period. It's probably okay to say that, but check with your pre-award support people. Hello, I know R01 score system has changed. Does this affect the classical ABC structure of the grant? Great question. Or are we continue to distribute the same way the section? So the answer is maybe. We'll see, right? So it's a really good question though, because this person is asking to just by convention nowadays, the way people create subheaders in an R01 are A significance, B innovation, C approach. So the ABC is the part that's by convention. Those three subheaders are not by convention. Like that's what the subheaders are: significance, innovation, and approach. Um, but now we have consolidated significance and innovation into a single scored criteria. So in the applications I worked on for the February deadline, I used one of three approaches, depending on what I thought was most useful for the applicant's project. So for some applicants, I combined them into significance and innovation and then created a single section that dealt with both of those. In the instances when I opted to do that, it was often because there was a lot of overlap between those two sections, or they didn't have a particularly innovative approach. They were using a more tried and true strategy, which was the most scientifically appropriate to conduct that project. And I kind of wanted to de-emphasize that by not having it be a separate section. If the project was something, I can think of several methods grants I worked on for the February 5th deadline. In that case, I maintained the typical structure of A significance, B innovation, because I really wanted the innovation section to stand on its own and really kind of sing in terms of talking about this new methodology that the person was doing. So yeah, actually, so there were two. I think I said there were three. Those are the two approaches that I used, but we don't have any information yet, right? Because the deadlines haven't happened. January 25th is the first set of deadlines that will have the those scored criteria. So none of us have ever laid eyes on a set of summary statements for a project in the new scoring criteria. So this is all kind of we're learning as we go kind of situation. So my best guess was that it's okay to do it either way, and I picked one or the other based on what allowed me to best present the story of that specific project. So for whatever that's worth, it's probably a question we should revisit in about 6 months after we've seen a set of summary statements. Okay. Is there any other venue for submitting study section requests than the assignment request form? How likely is the study section request to be granted for an A0? The Center for Scientific Review will only look for study section requests in the assignment request form. So that's where they have to be made. But keep in mind that there is also on that 2-page form, there's an open response where you can provide your rationale for making that selection. There's never a guarantee that they will honor your request. And sometimes maddeningly, I hear from applicants where they keep trying to go to what they think is the most appropriate study section, and CSR keeps booting them over to one that they feel is not appropriate. So there's no guarantee. Most of the time, in my experience, they do honor the request, but sometimes they don't, and sometimes they consistently don't honor the request, which is where that open response field can really come in handy. So in the assignment request form, there's an open response where you can provide your rationale for why you're selecting that study section. And I've had advised clients to also use it to explain why you're not requesting a different one that you keep getting sent to. So you can say, I think this is the most appropriate study section because of XYZ. And I don't think this other study section is the most appropriate because of X, Y, and Z. Another option, if you keep consistently getting booted to the wrong study section, is you can make a request. This isn't written anywhere that I know of on the NIH website or the CSR website, but you are allowed to request an ad hoc member. You can ask the scientific review officer who runs the study section meeting. You can request one or more ad hoc reviewers. And the way that you go about doing that is after you upload and you're assigned to a study section, you can ask the SRO to please consider a request for an ad hoc reviewer. The way that you want to say it is, in order to get a fair and impartial review, I would need a reviewer with XYZ expertise, which doesn't currently exist on your panel. Would you consider adding that expertise via ad hoc member? You can't make a request for a specific person, but you can request an ad hoc reviewer with specific expertise. So that's a way to kind of deal with that if you keep getting booted to the wrong one. But try that open response field. I hope that's helpful. Okay, in the one-page specific aims document, is it a good idea to write about preliminary results? That's a great question. So I would mention them. It is probably not a place where you can get into a lot of detail, particularly if some aspect of your results is equivocal. You can't get into nuance. It's a one-page form. So, you need a paragraph that gives information about the disease burden and the background of the project and the knowledge gap. And then you're going to have a we propose paragraph where you talk about the project you're proposing, and then you get into your aims, and then there's an impact statement. So there's a limited amount of space for each of these things. I do think it's important to mention the preliminary data, even if you're tight on space and all you can say are our preliminary results appear to support our working hypothesis. Even if you just say that, I think it's a good idea. But if you have really gorgeous preliminary data, sure, say something about it. Like, it's okay. Again, you don't want to get into the weeds because there's not a lot of space, but you can either talk about it in the narrative overview, that opening paragraph, and have it lead to the knowledge gap at the end of that paragraph, or you could have it in the we propose paragraph where you talk about your proposed project. Wherever it feels like the more logical place to you, you could have a couple of sentences where you talk about your preliminary data. And as I said, even if it's just to say our preliminary data appear to support our hypothesis, that's good, because it's letting reviewers know that you have preliminary data if it's appropriate for your mechanism. But if they're gorgeous data, you can say more. You could, maybe you want to include 3 or 4 sentences describing, what your preliminary project was and what the data show and how that is being used to inform the design of the current project. So, and I think I talk about that a little bit in the Master the R series, chapter 2, specific aims, if you're looking for examples of how to do that. Okay, the NIH has changed the scoring criteria. Do you have any insights or suggestions for preparing the new submission? Okay, so we've discussed this actually at length in previous Ask the Grant Writing Expert sessions, and we have blog posts on this. So if you have a really specific question about that, I'm happy to answer that. But I did an entire mini tutorial in Ask the Grant Writing Expert on Factor 1, and then another one on Factor 2 and 3. But, and we've just talked a little bit about, how to structure the application. But, again, this is all guesswork at this point, because we haven't even passed a deadline yet that it's going to use the new scoring criteria, which means that we're not going to get summary statements on those the new scoring criteria projects until the summer. So this is probably a question to revisit then, but all of my suggestions about how to deal with that are in those other AGE sessions. Those recordings are available in one of 2 places. Everybody who is on this session live has access to the course dashboard. The recordings of Ask the Grant Writing Expert are all there, so you can just scroll through and look for the one that has the mini tutorial for Factor 1 or Factors 2 and 3. Or you can go to our YouTube channel, and there the mini tutorials are, the questions are time-stamped. So, okay, and the person saying, great, thank you, got it. Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes left. So again, I'm just going to make a pitch for, we just got another question. Okay, so let's answer the question. Meg, would you wade into the complexities of changing institutions after R01 submission, but before decision award? Oh, Assuming the team at institution A agrees to stay on the proposed study, what are the big issues? How the study panel reviews the resources at the new institution. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood it. I think what you're saying is your institution, your university, not the NIH institution. You're not, is that correct? Like you're not talking about swapping. Okay, great. So when you said institution, I thought you meant like we were applying to NCI and then we changed our minds and decided to go to NHLBI. Yeah, so the PI changes jobs. Oh, that's a little tricky, and the answer to that can vary depending on when that happens. But typically, the PI can bring the project with them. NIH is used to dealing with this. There is a set of forms that you have to put in, and you're going to work with your program officer on how to do this. So the original sponsoring institute has to relinquish the project and the new sponsoring institute has to accept it. And I don't know, again, because I don't typically deal with post-award stuff, I don't know if there's any kind of additional go, no go kind of review around whether the original, the receiving institution has to undergo any kind of review to make sure that their resources are appropriate. So I know there is a set of paperwork that you have to fill out. I would contact your program officer about how to do. They do this all the time, and it won't throw them. This happens all the time, and people take their R01 with them. So just contact your program officer about how to do this, and contact the receiving organization. Not so much the place you're leaving, but the place you're going to, because they're highly incentivized to work. Their pre-awards support office is going to be incentivized to work with you because they're getting all those indirects now, so they'll help you put that whole package together. The place you're leaving is probably not going to help at all because they're losing money doing this. So I would contact your program officer and the post-award support office at the organization where the PI is going. So, okay, hopefully that helps. Hopefully that's helpful. And we're out of time, and I'll just ask people again. Feel free to email me, meg@bouviergrant.com. It's in the chat with suggestions for topics and guests for the upcoming sessions of AGE. And let me know if you're willing to have any part of your Ames page edited live on camera. I would edit ahead of time and run it by you before we did it, but just let me know. And yeah, good luck, everybody, with your applications. I know we're coming up on deadlines, so courage, stay strong, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Have a great January. Take care. Bye-bye.